Welcome to Around the Empire, the show that takes you around the U.S. Empire. I'm your host, Dan Wright.
And I'm your host, Joanne.
And on this episode, August 24th, 2017, we interview Kovan Direj. Kovan is a Kurd from Rojava, Syria. He's a photographer, journalist, and documentary film producer who spent most of his life in Aleppo and Qamishli and now works with refugees in Sweden. Here is that interview.
Hi, Kovan. So glad to have you today. Welcome to Around the Empire.
I'm glad to be here with you.
Thanks.
Hi, Kovan.
Yeah, hello.
And thanks to Joanne for introducing us. So we're hoping to learn more about the Kurdish perspective on the war in Syria, like the goals and the prospects for a Kurdish-led state in Rojava, or I think it's the Democratic Federation of Northern Syria, and also other autonomous Kurdish states in the region, if you have things to say about that. But before we get into that, why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
Well, my name is Kovan, as you introduced me. I'm from Syria. I grew up in Aleppo, and I was between Aleppo and northern Syria, which is Qamishli. So I've spent most of my life there.
Okay. Can I ask, Kovan, what is as someone who lived there and grew up there, what is your perspective on the timeline of the Syrian war, how it started? Because we hear all sorts of conflicting perspectives and narratives. So what's your narrative as someone who was there?
Actually, the Syrian war, it didn't start as a war. It started like as an uprising. In the beginning, it wasn't kind of, because the process of Arab Spring, it was Syria in this process too. The people were looking at the TV, like really like trying, because you saw like Egyptian people and you saw Tunisian people like really uprising. So that there was some kind of emotional moving inside their hearts, but they weren't able to say it. So when it started, it was like kind of really, I would say, limited asks and limited requests from the government, like to bettering the situation and to ask about some changes. And in this process, it take like about 2 months, and then the actual the actual war started it from different side, not only from the regime side, but the other people too. So, and it take like from a city to another city and to another city and spread all over Syria. In the beginning, there was FSA, which is most of them, they were they were part of Syrian regime army, and they dispatched to the other side. And in this, I'm talking about the first months, and after that the civil people started to go inside the FSA, and it changed the structure of FSA. But I wouldn't say, because now I wouldn't name it FSA, but I would name it FSAs in plural, because we don't have one structure army, because we have a different, like more than 1,000 faction and groups and brigades, as they call themselves. On the other side, we saw the Syrian regime, which was like not only army, but they had an empire of secret police, like different factions, different intel. So that they were like really following each person in Syria. And they starting from that point to be like a mafia. So it didn't become like a structure for the government, but become like a mafia. And this is like all of it got inside. So let's go back to the main question of the Kurds here. Let's decrease the propaganda and increase the facts in Syrian problem. When the problem happened, we had two sides, officially and unofficially, in Syria. It was the Syrian regime and the other group based in Turkey. And this group based in Turkey, it was like the coalition. It was controlled by Muslim Brotherhood.
Is that the FSA?
The politic faction, I mean.
Okay.
The coalition, Syrian coalition.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay.
So those groups, like, they were struggling for one thing, which is the power, only the chair. They didn't have actual project for the whole Syrian to have them. So the Kurds were like this nation between two sides asking about their rights. The Syrian regime was smarter than the opposition, I would call them opposition at that time, because the Syrian regime tried to like give some benefit to the Kurds, because we have like 200,000 Kurdish who get, you know, like their ID were taken from them in the beginning of 70s. Their lands were given to Arabs who came from Raqqa and all this area. So the Syrian regime was trying like just to calm down the Kurds. But in this area, the Kurds didn't take any side, because both sides didn't give actual project to the Kurds. So the Kurds tried to build themselves. And in this, I remember in 2011, in the beginning of 2012, the Kurds in Al-Ashrafiyah and Sheikh Massoud did like they had an election. So they were trying to find the representative of each neighbor and trying to do like democratic leadership. And the people was really like shocked about that. Like, what are you doing, you know, at that time? And they started to secure their neighbors with 1 or 2 guns and try to be away from the war. And this project, it became Rojava now.
Oh, okay.
So this project that they started, it became Rojava, because they didn't take any part of the war. They just say, we don't want to be in this war because it's not a revolution, but it's a civil war. And if we enter to this black hole, it will never end.
Okay, that makes sense. So you're saying there is in 2011 would be when the reform movement, if you like, starts. It's not initially about regime change. It's about more rights for people within Syria. It breaks into, it seems to be sectarian early on, but it's definitely sectarian now, or sectarian-ish, I guess, because some of the Sunnis are with the Assad government. You're saying the Kurds see this happening. They see themselves separate from the rest of Syria, or within their own, I guess, milieu or whatever, and they say, let's try to be neutral and not go one way or the other. And then what is now, I guess, seemingly going to be part of a Kurdish state, or some people want it to be part of an independent state. You're saying that's how that developed? Is that they basically said, well, the Syrians are fighting each other. Why don't we form our own thing? Or am I misreading your narrative?
Well, it wasn't like this, because I mean the Kurdish area, because this Kurdish, like the Kurdish parties were taking place in it.
Oh, okay.
So they have like they can organize the people in this area. But we see ourselves as a Syrian, because I'm a Kurd, but I know Syria more than other part of Kurdistan, and this has happened. And we are Syrian, you know, like on the ID and on the nationality, we are Syrian, and we belong to Syria. But the view that we see it is not the same as our other, as the Kurds say, as other Syrian partner. We don't see the only changing Assad will solve the problem, because the problem, it wasn't Assad who bribed, it wasn't Assad who's killing people, it wasn't Assad, but the system, the structure of the system, and that's the problem. To change that system, you need a revolution to change it, not only the head of the power. And you leave the structure as it is. That was the problem.
So if the Syrian coalition had prevailed, the opposition had prevailed and ousted Assad in 2012 or 2013, you think some of the Kurds would not have been thinking that's a great deal for them? Would it be better or worse, or just not a good change?
Well, the Kurds asked both sides to give them some benefits, like some not benefits, I would say some rights on a paper. Both of them, they were saying, after the revolution, after we're done with the other part. And this is, the Kurds had really big experience with this. Like after Saddam Hussein, when Saddam Hussein came to the chair, he said the same thing to the Kurds. After Khomeini, like the revolution in Iran, he said the same word. Ataturk in Turkey, he said the same word, like after I'm done with this, I will give you a right. So the Kurds said, no, if you're honest with me, tell me something. Let's write something. Let's write some contract.
Okay.
And they couldn't provide it, because, you know, Syrian regime is controlled by Iran and the opposition is controlled by Turkey. And guess those two countries are really not good friends.
Oh, so you're like in a meat grinder. Neither side is, or a pincer. You're kind of, so yes. Neither side is too friendly to Kurdish interests.
Yeah, but the issue is like the Kurds, now if you look at the Kurdish problem in Middle East, it's a trigger of 70 now. Because now after Syrian crisis, the Kurds, now they're playing a big role in Syrian war and playing a big role in Iraq and in Turkey and Iran as well. Like those countries, they are really afraid about a new like Kurdish state, but it's not Kurdish state. Like if Turkey, we saw in Turkey, like during the peace process, like the Kurds was really happy about that, and Turkey couldn't do that because the national problem in Turkey, the nationalists and the other areas, the other voters for the government, they can't accept that. So that's make a bigger problem. In Iran, the same problem, because the Kurds playing a big role in Iran. If anything happened, they know it will come from the Kurds. You know, as ISIS attacked Kobani, because they knew any further attack on Raqqa, it will be from Kobani. You know,
okay.
So this is how the big image of Middle East is working.
Well, can you go into Iran, the Iranian-Kurdish relationship? That's something I'm less familiar with. I mean, we're Turkey, because Turkey is basically threatening to bomb the coalition the U.S. has formed to take Raqqa right now. They've basically said these are all PKK sympathizers, or the people who are insurgents in eastern Turkey, and we don't want them to win. And the U.S. is kind of saying, well, let them take Raqqa first, then you can do whatever you want. But what is the relationship with the Kurds and Iran? Because that doesn't get a lot of attention, at least over here, that I see.
Well, Iran, there is 6 million Kurds living in Iran.
Okay.
And Iran had a big problem with the Kurds because after the revolution, they had a really big fight with the Kurds. And Iran is really now really aware of any Kurdish uprising. It will destroy the country, because the country is basically on a volcano. It's not like as it seems now, because the country is divided. Iran is divided, and Iran's policy, it was always throw the problem in neighbors, don't bring it to your house. Throw the ball outside, don't bring it to your house. So that's the Iran policy. And now in Syria, we don't have any more Bashar al-Assad. Bashar al-Assad is long gone. Like in 2014, that was the end of Bashar al-Assad system. Now is Iranian and Russian who's fighting in Syria. Is not the Syrian regime, because Syrian regime structure is done. We have no Syrian regime. It's a mafias now, group of mafias who are fighting. And that's why Iran is trying to destroy any hope of the Kurds in that area to not bring the fire to your house. But if we look at it, the Iranian and Turkish, they have different ideology. They have different thoughts. They have different plans. And when they came to our argument, it will be against the Kurds, because it's I would name it like beneficial interest between both sides.
Wow. So Turkey's upset by the idea of Kurdish autonomy because they think it's a threat to their eastern part of the country and ultimately the country. Yes. Iraq doesn't want to hand over, or wants a different power sharing relationship because of particularly Kirkuk's oil. Syria has sort of collapsed on itself. And you're saying Iran has an interest in preventing Kurdish power because they're afraid that could spark an uprising of Kurds within Iran.
Yes. The same as Turkey now. It's the same as Turkey.
Oh, that's interesting.
Turkey. Because if we go back to the history, in 2014, there was a big revolution in Syria, Kurdish revolution against Syrian regime. It wasn't because, basically it started because of football match, but there was a lot of Kurdish emotion and a lot of Kurdish hopes, because in Iraq, the Kurds, they did get, after the invasion, 2003, the Kurds get their rights. So they said, oh, why they get their rights? Why don't we get our rights too? So there was this kind of issue. So Turkey now trying to destroy this kind of hopes, trying to destroy this kind of dream to just, calm down the areas.
When you talk about get their rights, can you give us a little bit more detail on what that means?
Well, if we talk about basic rights of that provided by United Nations, which is a nation should practice their tradition, their language, and their culture freely. None of those were practiced in Syria. Like my name, I was now on my Syrian ID, it's Syrian Arabic person.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no name of the Kurds or Kurdish language or Kurdish nation in Syria, because Syria is one of the Bas is fascist party. So there is only one nation living in Syria, which is Arabs,
And
despite all these other nations.
and before the revolution, Kurdish rights, you couldn't speak the language. And is it the name of the country, or you said it's the Arab culture that's forced on everyone?
You know, like, I can't tell you can't speak the language, but it's not only speaking the language, practicing the language. I meant practicing the language, to learn by your own language, to get education by your own language, to have your name as a language registered in the government and be fully supported by the government. None of this were provided. And the Kurdish, after 2004, like, the regime starting to target the Kurds really. And before the revolution, like in the early days of revolution, they arrested like around 80,000 Kurds because they thought the revolution will start from the Kurds in 2011, and we are talking about. After the Arabs started it in Idlib and other areas, so they released the Kurds, and they tried to build the relationship with the Kurds. But the Kurds, they aware of Syrian regime, how they plan.
And wait, just to clarify that, you're saying in 2011, when the Syrian government, the Assad government, arrested tens of thousands of Kurds, thinking that was where the source of the rebellion was. So it was like proactive. They were like, we're going to arrest them before they can do anything. And then meanwhile, it was actually the Arabs that started it. And so they released the people they had arrested and said, hey, let's be friends.
Yes, that's how it was. Like, because there is Nowruz, which is like the 23rd of March, which is the national day of the Kurds. And before that days, they thought this day it will be the start of revolution, and the Kurds will started it, you know? So they arrest like 80,000. In Aleppo, there was 40,000 persons arrested. Wow. I know most of them, like my neighbors, everybody was arrested in that day, you know? And they released them after like 20 days because the Kurd didn't start it, and other people started it.
Wow, that's a little inept. But wasn't it the Arab Spring? Okay, they just have an historic fear of the Kurds causing rebellions. It's just historic. Okay,
that's as Turkey now. They're doing the same thing. Yes.
And with the rights situation, the situation before the war and the situation now, is it better for the Kurdish rights situation, or does it not matter because the regime doesn't have any control over you?
Well, regime doesn't have any control over Rojava since 2013, because the actual for different reasons, the regime withdraw its forces to support the big cities like Aleppo, Damascus, and everything, and because they couldn't hold the lands because it spread, so they were trying to get them. So the Kurds organized themselves, like as I said, in 2011 when they did like little the elections and all this, so they tried to replace the government. They knew what's going to happen in Syria, so they replaced the government with local government. It wasn't really so strong government, but that's little government, it became Rojava right now. They started with a little checkpoints, and this checkpoint, it was like I witnessed one checkpoint. There was one Kalashnikov, 20% with one Kalashnikov on it, and that's how it started it. And the situation before the revolution and after the revolution, I would name it revolution in Syria, that really like big steps. It's not only for the Kurds. Let's name it. Let's bring another issue of Rojava revolution. The women, now the Syrian women have more rights under the government of Rojava, but I wouldn't say it like Rojava state. I would name it female state, because now the female, we're talking about Middle East, about dominated man society. Now they're trying to bring a really big and strong and extreme democracy to the females there. It's practiced not only for the females, but it's practiced for the Kurdish, but only other nation among Rojavas. And that's really big question for Arabs themselves, because they can't accept that because the Islamic tradition or their own tradition. But they're this laws are being impact on them too.
Oh, what happened to the Syrians who weren't in the area of Rojava? Meaning, say you were in Aleppo, say you were in somewhere else. Did you run to the Kurdish area? I mean, what happened to the Kurds that weren't or are all the Kurds mostly over there? You know what I'm saying? Like, if the war breaks out and there's a Kurdish autonomous region, where did Kurds in other parts of Syria living? What did they do? Did they run to that area, or just leave the country, or stay where they were?
It depends. Like me myself, I grew up in Aleppo, but I had my village in northern Syria, in Qamishli area. So I would go to my village because it's a little village and it's safer to me in this. But most of the people, like, they didn't have other choice to go anywhere. That was their house, that was their area, everything was there. So they kept there. Like, we have people who are like since hundreds of years in Damascus, hundreds of years in Aleppo, so they don't have any other option to go. But we had two villages, like all the factions, FSA, backed by Al Qaeda, backed by ISIS, they attacked them. Northern Aleppo, southern Aleppo, till Hasl, till Aran. Those people, they went to Afrin to go to Kurdish area. But the issue is not only the Kurds went to Rojava, the Arabs themselves. Like, we have 1 million displacement Arabs living within Rojava from Aleppo, from Raqqa, from all these areas. They came to live in Rojava because the people seeking the safe haven, and that's where Rojava provided, despite like a lot of problems, economic problem, but it was safer.
Okay, and you're saying that the people who came who were not in the Kurdish tradition, or maybe some Kurds too, are running into cultural conflict because, I mean, I know there's lots of different factions within the Kurdish group, but one of them definitely is very left-wing. I think the PKK is actually Marxist, or has the hammer and sickle, or did have the hammer and sickle. I'm not totally up to date. And you're saying some of these refugees, including maybe some Kurds, are running into cultural issues with this new form of government, or the more, I guess, egalitarian or left-wing government?
Well, Syria, like, because the leak of the policy in Syria, because as I told you, in Syria we had only one party. It was Ba'ath party, and you're not allowed to go to any places, and you don't know what's leftist, what's right, what's this. You don't know this kind of issues. But the people were seeking like safe haven, like the areas of Rojava, because they didn't attack the regime or the FSA, so they were in a safe. Not regime bombing them, not FSA. FSA tried many times, because supported by Turkey, to attack those areas, but those attacks were replied, so they get silent. So the people starting to go there because they don't want to go to Turkey or anywhere else, so they will go live in these areas. But most of the peoples who try to reach these areas is not based because it's Kurdish area or Arabic area, but it's because it's safer for them. So they were thinking like, today or tomorrow we will go back to our home, the war will end, so we don't want to go to other areas. And let's go back to your question, like you saying PKK or something like this. But it's not PYD, it's PYD, which is like one of the 33 Kurdish political party in Syria. And the government of Rojava, it's not only PYD. Maybe PYD was leading it in the beginning, but now we have 13 party joining this kind of revolution in Rojava in Syria. And the issue is, like, most of the people say PKK or YPG or any other different names, but for the people it's YPG, which is all of them, the Syrian fighters, and we have some American or other, like, trying to join after ISIS. That's make it more clear to the people, because our problem, it was communicating with outside world, because now it's isolated between 4 countries, which is not allowed to any kind of media or communication with outside world. And we have Turkey, which is like blocking everything and have a really empire of media trying to destroy this kind of hope, but not because of PKK, but it's because the Kurdish state on its border, 800 kilometers, that make the Turkish Kurd trying to build a new government in Turkey. That's the Turkish fear of that. And you saw it, like, Turkey was friend, KRG. They just said, no, we don't want any country for the Kurds in KRG too. So that make it clear. It's not only one political party, but it's a Kurdish nation which is targeted by Turkey.
Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between the Syrian Kurds the relationship of the Syrian Kurds with the KRG, the Iraqi Kurdistan, and the Kurds in Turkey and the Kurds in Iran?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the relation between those kind of Kurds, it's only based on national interest, which is they look at themselves as a Kurdish. Any part of Kurdistan try to build something that all the Kurds will come to help. We saw that example really clear in Kobane, like not only the Syrian Kurd fought there, but from Iran, from Iraq, from Turkey, everybody went there. When it came to the politic parties, that we have different political parties, but when it came to the people, they just look at each other as a brothers. And because we are brothers, like me, I'm divided in Sykes-Picot. I have half of my family in Syria, other half in Turkey, and the third half in Iraq. So that's how it's going to be, you know. This is how it is.
Okay, so it seems somewhat a little bit more tenuous. It's not total solidarity, but there is some solidarity. Is a Kurdish state possible, likely, even if it was, let's say, for example, Turkey wasn't trying to sabotage it every step of the way? Would that be a viable thing that Kurds from Syria, Iran, Iraq, and Eastern Turkey would form a unified political force?
Well, if you ask any Kurd all over the world, despite the place, he will say, I want a Kurdistan. You know, that's a dream. Like we got this dream with the milk of our mother. It will be like this. We drink it like this. When we were young, we were always trying to get this education from mothers, families, and friends. But if you face it, the reality, most of the Kurds, they try to say, we want to live with the country that we are, but to have our own rights. Like to live like in kind of federal system. Like we want to have our own rights and we want to live in this country. We don't want any conflict. But most of the country, they don't accept any rights. Like if you look at Turkey, and Syria, it's the same system because they say one nation, one language, one flag.
Right.
So in Iran, the same thing issue. And in Iraq, it was the same in Saddam Hussein time.
Right, and that's the pan-Arabism of the Ba'ath Party from Saddam and his, not this Assad, the father Assad. You know, at one time there was even a discussion of having a kind of Syria and Iraq merge, which Saddam didn't really want to do anyway. But so they, for their, it's kind of a totalitarian, it's not kind of, it is a totalitarian system where the ideology means everyone is one people, one race. So any group, doesn't necessarily just the Kurds, but any group that doesn't want to accept the national identity is a threat to the ideology. Is that a way of understanding it?
It's a way of ideology and there is another issue, because the Kurds are really organized in the parties, are really organized and really open-minded because, as I told you, we had 33 political parties. And it was forbidden to be in any political party. Like all the political party in Syria, it was like really taboo, you know. So the Kurds had really had information about the structure of the government and had all this kind of issue. And they were most known about because they had this hope to build a Kurdistan, and that was a taboo for the Damascus and for other capitals in the areas. For the Kurds, most of them, they just try to build to live in the country they are in, but with the federal system. That's what they think. But the other country, they say my own brother, he got arrested because he didn't cooperate to be a spy with the Syrian government, and he had a really kind of suit. Told him he tried to divide the land of Syrian Arab Republic and give it to another country. That was really, and he was a master student. So this kind of issue, he was targeting the Kurds. And when you live in oppression, that give you a big hope to destroy this kind of countries.
So it was a dream to have this Kurdistan,
yes.
But because of the realities of politics. And it was kind of say, what's a dream? But since maybe that's a dream, we just want to live under federal systems that recognize minority rights.
Yes.
But now, because of this chaos, it's not necessarily a dream, right? I mean, it could, in theory, happen. I think at least the Iraqi Kurds, you could argue, have such a level of autonomy, particularly after ISIS marched through Iraq. They're essentially running a Kurdish, I can't say state, quasi-state. So, I mean, that's the big question is what happens at the end of the Syrian war? The Syrian war is going to end. It looks like all the Sunni radicals or jihad, whatever, groups are being pushed into Idlib. It looks like because of Russian and Iranian backing, Assad is going to stay in power, and eventually the U.S. is going to have some kind of agreement. And now you see the Kurdish forces and the U.S. allied forces taking ISIS out of Raqqa. So there could be some potential for some kind of quasi-Kurdish state, right? It's not necessarily a dream, or is it still just a dream?
Can I just interject here? I mean, I thought they did form the Democratic Federation of Northern Syria. That's an official state, as far as I know. It has a leader.
It's not
Is
recognized.
that true, or can you help us understand what that is?
Yeah, it's for northern Syria. It's not only for Kurdistan. It's not Kurdistan, northern Syria or something. It's for all people who live in Rojava and northern Syria.
So they rebranded it to say it's not a Kurdish state now. It's not Rojava. It's a Federation of Northern Syria. Democratic.
Yeah, the system that the Kurds provided is not particularly for the Kurds. It can be packed on other parts of Syria. Well, the idea is to live, because in Syria we have more than 7 to 10 minorities living in Syria. Right. And if you calculate that, the Sunni themselves, they are not majority. They will be minority. The other minority. So that's this kind of system. It provides the rights for every minority in Syria. And they tried to impact this in all over Syria, but other faction, they didn't accept it. So they provide this kind of issues to the areas that they have control over it, like Manbij and Raqqa and everywhere. But those cities is controlled by their own people, because in Manbij we had a lot of Kurds there, but it's not necessarily the Kurds will be in leadership. The other people, they should be in leadership. It's dividing it's like Lebanese system. If you look at Lebanese, it's divided by minorities and others. So this is how it goes in Rojava, and not only Rojava, because Rojava is part of this Federation, Northern Syria Federation.
Okay, so even with Kurds in control, they don't necessarily want to impose, I guess, an ethnostate. So it could be just an area, a region, or an area of some sort of political entity that is essentially a federated system, or?
Yes, they try to provide this kind of system that every nation, because in the Kurdish, like even in KRG, we don't have, it's not 100% Kurdish areas. Because we in Middle East, the people of Middle East are really mixed with each other. We don't have a state to be 100% state. Like if we try to impact a state, like it's a Kurdistan state, what make us different from other nations that in the areas? What make us different from Turkey? What make us different from Syria? Which is we fight there to get our own right, and we come and destroy other minorities within the Kurds. That make it really a big question mark, How come you're fighting for your rights, but you're destroying other people's rights? So this is the project, like all the people who living in Rojava to get their own right. It's not a matter of name. It's a matter of practicing the rights, practicing your own, I would say, your own nationality and culture and everything inside this culture, inside this big area, which is called Northern Syria Federation.
Okay, so you're saying it's not the Israeli model. It's where you have a different state. You say, well, we're not getting our own rights because people don't respect us. We need to have our own state to have our own rights protected. We need, for example, a Jewish state for Jews to be protected. You're saying it's kind of more like a multicultural federation type system where there'll be a lot of Kurds there because that's where Kurds typically live, but it will not be de jure or legally a Kurdish-centric government or laws that promote Kurdish culture.
Yeah.
Right?
It would be formed by the Kurds, but not just for the Kurds. Now, how about the issues of culture and language and Like, how would you deal with that kind of thing? And what language would be the official language? What language would they use in the schools, or would there be multiple? Do you have different schools? Like, how would that? Do they have that worked out?
Yeah, that depends on the areas. That depend on the people who live in that area. Like if you went to a Jazeera, which is northern East Syria, we have 3 different ethnic living there: Kurds, Arabs, and Syriac or Assyrian. So the all official papers, it's written in those 3 languages. And
it's like
the
Quebec.
school,
Okay. French.
yes. So the schools are really in those 3 languages. Like the Kurdish, they will get their own mother language school, and Arabs will have the same, and the Syriac will have the same. It's not necessary to separate the school, but you can separate the students or give them the same education, but the same different languages. And you have one common languages, which will be Arabic or Kurdish, or wherever it's rolling by the country, or maybe be English. So the issue is like here is not to divide the people in their color or face or the nationality, but bring them together and make a state from multi-ethnic people, which understanding each other, try to bettering this country, not destroying based on hope and ethnic and all this.
I've been watching the negotiations per se as they've been going on, and they have Geneva and the ones in Astana in Kazakhstan. And the way I understand it is, in order to have Turkey and maybe Iran at the table, they refuse to bring the Kurdish representatives to the table, except I think there was some type of a committee or a group of people of Kurds created, but they were not, my understanding is they weren't appointed by the Kurdish people themselves. They were appointed by either Russia or the Syrian government, and that the Syrian Kurds don't feel that they really are negotiating on their behalf. I might have that wrong. So what I'm wondering is, I mean, I don't see a lot coming out of those negotiations right now. Maybe they made some progress last year or the year before, but how will this Democratic Federation of Northern Syria, how will that be negotiated if the Kurds have no seat at the table?
So that's the biggest question for the Kurds themselves, because all the time we have a war among the Kurds. We are really good fighters. We gain the battle, but we lose on the table. So that's a common word among all the Kurds. They know this really particularly. And you asked your guest before me, like, why American helping the Syrian Kurds, and despite the ideology and all this and the regional factors denying that. Well, the American did help the Kurds because there was nobody except the Kurds to trust. Because if American, like we see America as a democratic country, like in the whole world, because the president being elected, that's the truth, because that's democracy is being impacted. And to support like the Kurds, it wouldn't be like big surprises for the Kurds, because both of them, they have common enemy. And American come and help the Kurds. The Kurds didn't ask about the help, because the Kurds have a power. They have an army. They have an organized army. They are fighting ISIS since decades, like I would say since 2013, which nobody knew about ISIS. And about Asitana, like Asitana, as I told you, the players who are playing in Asitana is just like, they're just like dummy, because the people who's really, the war in Syria is not between Syria. It's between Iran, and so Iran, and we have Russia and Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, which had really big problem among themselves, which faction they will support, But let's not forget one big issue here: Israel. What's Israel role in this problem? Like, it's the silent factor in Syrian problem. What's his role? Like that. Let's not forget it. And Israel had a big rule inside Syrian war, which is like, make big problem, destroy your enemy. And that's what happened in Syria. That's why we don't see like really kind of progress nowadays. I wouldn't say because it's Israel who did that, but because the people who's supporting the fighters on the ground, they couldn't have an agreement about that.
Oh, so what is the Israeli role actually? That's worth like fleshing out a bit because the U.S. media is so biased. It has gotten like no coverage. It's like basically they've had nothing, even though reports break out occasionally, like, hey, Al Qaeda is getting medical service from Israel, or hey, ISIS is getting some support, or oil's being moved, but there's like no analysis of what's happening. So what
we don't
do you
get the
think?
straight story. We don't.
Well, let's go back to the beginning of the revolution. Let's go back to the beginning of revolution. Let's go to how the Syrian regime dealt with the problem. The Syrian regime is not really dumb regime because it's 50 years old regime which had really a finger in each bad hole in the whole Middle East. They know how the Middle East roll. They know how it roll. Like if we go back to 2004 when American begged Syrian to stop sending Islamists to there in 2005, and Syrian regime provided some intelligentsia to America just to keep silent on Syria. So Syria has really big role in Middle East, and there is a word says who control Damascus, he control Middle East.
Oh, okay.
So that's it. The Syrian regime, when the problem happened, Syrian regime had two messages: one to the West, another to Turkey. And the West was through Israel, and to Turkey was through the Kurds. So what happened is Syrian regime withdrew it from the border of Israel and handed over to this Islamists. And in Turkey, they withdrew from Kurdish area and handed to the Kurds. So it was like this clear. To Israel, if I go, Islamist is coming on your borders. And that was really big threat to Israel. And to Turkey, if I go, the Kurds are coming to take these areas and deal with this and be happy with this. So that's what Syrian regime did it. The Islamists, when they, like FSA, when they tried to do that, Al-Qaeda and all these groups tried to push to the Israeli border, which they get the borders. So America and Israel and England, they trained some, because you heard about the training of Syrian rebels, which took place in Jordan, but nobody knew about them, but nobody heard about them. Where are they? Those who were on the border between Syria and Israel. Those who trained there, and their job it was to protect the Israeli border, and that's how it happened.
Oh, the moderate rebels trained in Jordan were actually proxies for Israel?
Yes, it wasn't proxies for Israel, but it was the people who protecting that. And if you go back to the peacekeepers reports between 2014 and 15 and 16, you will see how the deal between Israel and those people happened.
Oh, that's interesting. So Syria, so you're saying Assad, because they played it out the right way, they said, hey, you may not like me, but if I go down, you're getting screwed by Islamists on your border. And Turkey, if I go down, you're getting the Kurds, which is why previously Turkey played a kind of, Erdogan played a weird game because he was not initially very anti-Assad. No. And then he thought Assad was going to fall anyway, so then he jumped on. And now he's stepping back a little bit. What do you think?
No, Syrian regime, it was after 1982, Syrian regime was anti-Islam, Muslim Brotherhood, because after what happened to Hamas, and Erdogan is Muslim Brotherhood. So in 2000, and the late when the Syrian Assad, the son, took place, he tried to open the canals with West through Turkey, and so Turkey had a really big benefit, economic beneficial in Syria. And they, like one day, like Bashar and Erdogan, they were saying we're brother. That's what happened in the media. They were saying we're brother, and my brother Bashar Assad and all this. But when the problem happened, Turkey had a plan. It was 6 months that Bashar Assad is gonna come. 6 months. The period will be 6 months, and then he will replace it with a government that Muslim Brotherhood. They will take a chair, and Syria will be another Turkey to Turkey.
Oh, okay.
So Syria, it wasn't like other like Egypt and all this. Iran will never hand it over to them.
And so therefore the new Muslim Brotherhood based government in Damascus is going to do that dirty work anyway. They'll keep the Kurds in line because they'll be allied with Turkey. So we don't need you, Assad. We can dump you overboard. So the threat of, well, if we go, the Kurds will rise up. Well, if we replace you with someone who's loyal to us, they'll control the Kurds.
Yeah, so that's what the Kurd thought. The Kurd said, our problem is not like this kind of, our war will be with Damascus. Who control Damascus? And all this war, it was side war. Like all the war that's coming in Rojava and in Syria, it was side war because they knew who controlled Damascus. That will be the biggest war with there to gain your rights from Damascus.
The Russian defense minister said recently, past couple of days, that, what did he say? He said the implementation of the de-escalation zone in Syria and the separation of terrorists from opposition have allowed to intensify the fight against terrorism, effectively ending the civil war in the country. So Sergei Shoigu is saying that the civil war in Syria is pretty much over. What do you think about that?
Well, I would say because now the fact is the help to opposition, or I would say FSAs, what used to be FSAs and the groups and Islamists, it's cut off by Turkey. And now they are trying to hand over Raqqa, Idlib to jihadists. And that, because this is what the Syrian regime from the first day, they didn't say revolution or enemy or whatever, they said jihadist. And those jihadists were in the Syrian regime prison after 2005 when they came back from Iraq. But at sudden, thousands of the jihadists were released when the problem happened in Syria. So that's why they were saying the Islamist, the radical. And now what they did is like they hand over Idlib to radicals and they said, we don't fight people, we fight those Islamists. And that's how it happened. But just a curiosity, from 2013 to 2015, Syrian regime didn't bomb Raqqa, didn't bomb ISIS, didn't bomb Al-Qaeda, but they did bomb other factions. That's just a curiosity and like a question. Why? Because that's give a lot of information. Like I would say a lot of information that happened because we will be shocked about that. But how the Syrian regime like handed over like because I was in an army one day and there is something in the what they teach us in Syrian army to destroy your weapon to not be handed over to your enemy.
Right.
That's in all. So the Syrian regime, when ISIS attack or anybody attack, they just leave the weapon and they don't destroy it. And the plan is over their head. They can't just target the store. So to escalate this kind of problem, this is what happened in Syria. This is what Syrian regime tried to do. And we don't have any more Syrian regime. We have a mafias. And Aleppo is not controlled by Syrian regime. It's controlled by Russian nowadays. It's Russian military police which run Aleppo. And other areas, it's Shia militia or this other militia, which we'll call them IDF.
Well, so what happens when there's a formal end to the Syrian civil war, which you're saying, essentially, if I'm understanding you correctly, is essentially now the regime or the Assad government has been reduced to basically running Damascus and partnering with other kind of chiefs or kind of warlords, if you like, or the big states. What they've seemed to have done, from my view, is they're pushing all the jihadists into Idlib. And then the next logical step is Russia's going to bomb the living hell out of Idlib. And then they'll say, okay, game over.
Yeah, that's what the plan. That was the plan. That's the plan with Turkey. Because the Turks now had a big problem, which is Kurds, on their borders, and it's big problem. The Turkey says, but the Kurds, we didn't have any attack by Syrian Kurds on Turkish territory, and despite that, they trying to protect it. But Turkey can't handle that. There is a state because it's fascist country. They can't handle like these people living there. So what happened is the plan was like this: the Syrian regime will, like black-eyed on Turkish attack on the Kurds. In replace, Turkey will stop helping their opposition and take all oppositions to the Jarablus area and leave Idlib for jihadists. So if Syrian regime attack a jihadist, nobody will say it's Syrian territory, but it will say Al-Qaeda area. So that was the plan.
Ultimately, what happens to Idlib after that? What do you think is the long-term plan for Idlib?
It's not the long-term for Idlib. Now that Idlib, during last months, like the Al-Qaeda took over all over Idlib. So now the Syrian regime will clear all the areas and now just surround Idlib. And Idlib, they will try to push further and further and further. They will try to do it and bomb it until they clear it. So that's what's going to happen in Idlib.
So that it comes back under the control of the Syrian government?
Yeah. It's what I would name it regime. I wouldn't name it government because there is no government like shoot its own people.
Right. But Assad government, Assad state, Assad mafia control is gone from the Kurdish area. And so it's weakened. It's generally a weakened state, if it's even a state at this point. And it's relying on Iranian militias and Russia to maintain its hold on the territory it has. So then what happens after Raqqa falls and ISIS essentially melts away or goes back to being a smaller force? Because it looks like even if Turkey and the Assad group is on good terms, Assad couldn't go in and clear the Kurds out anyway. Does that mean Turkey invades? What does Turkey do after the Kurds win in Raqqa?
That's a really good question. Now the Turkey is controlling over Syria. It's gone. Turkey doesn't control any part of Syria except Jarablus, this pocket, which was to stop the Kurdish unity Afrin with Kobane. So what's going to happen after Idlib? This is what the scenario will be. Syrian regime will go to the United Nations and say Turkey is invaded country, and I don't want this country in my area. Turkey will be out, but this is long term. And now Turkey was trying to do just to escalate problems with the Kurds, to not let the Kurds to reach this kind of autonomy. And all this what's going on, Turkey trying to get some rights from Iran, which is last week or before that, they get a meeting between Turkey and Iran. The source was the Kurds to make a joint forces attacking the Kurds in Kandil, PKK, or Syria, or wherever. So that's what happened. But let's not forget a bigger factor, which is USA and Russia. Because none of these countries can do anything without those countries. Russia is controlling Syria. And USA, whenever USA go to area, they don't withdraw really easily, And that's how this American policy.
Interesting.
Can we expand on that a little bit? How do the Syrian Kurds feel about the United States, and what's their hope, their expectation going forward with us, with the Americans?
After Raqqa falls.
Well, this is a big question when you say us American, because you're making yourself with the government.
Yeah, well, okay, I won't.
With the U.S. government. With the U.S. government.
Yeah. That was a bad way to frame it, because I very often, probably almost always, don't agree with our foreign policy.
But so, it says U.S., so we always say us.
I would say the government, because the government is the American government have a plan. When they have a plan for some areas, it's not what the people want or not. And the Syrian Kurds know that. And the help that came from U.S., it wasn't because they are Kurds and but because they are fighting ISIS, which is ISIS the boss country's enemy, And that's what they saw. What they not only from U.S. but other areas, which Kurds now represent the only democracy in Syria, and they represent only, I would say, the system that have a hope in Syria to bring some, I would say, safe and democracy to Syria. It's a Kurdish project, and they wait from anybody to get support. That's what they're waiting. All the Kurds in Syria, that's what they hope in U.S. and EU.
They're hoping for for us to stay for a long time. Well,
the Kurds, they were welcome. I think the American American army are not welcome in any part of Middle East as they are welcomed by Syria, by the Kurds in both countries.
Right, and it's funny if the Kurds don't get any autonomy, and let's say that the ground that they currently control, or they're in a coalition to control, goes back to example for the Assad government. If that's recognized, the Assad government can say the U.S. are occupying force, get out. You have no right to be on our territory.
Yeah, that's how it's gonna be. But if the Kurds have their own autonomy, Syrian regime can't do anything. So that's the areas it's in the Kurdish interest. So that Syrian regime can't do anything about it.
Would they count on American troops for decades, for a long time, in order to ensure, the autonomy of their state? Is that a requirement, do you think?
But we should look at which enemy we're talking about. If Syrian regime, let's talk about Syrian regime, because Syrian regime is not Syrian regime as 2000 and before 2011. Syrian regime is a collapsed regime. It's a collapsed country. There is no army as it was before. So the American depended on the Kurds, not Kurds depended on American. That's right. How we say. The American just provide some airstrikes, but didn't provide like land boots in Syria, right, and even in Iraq. So the Kurds, they knew this. They're waiting, like maybe at any moment the American will say, "I can't be with you. Bye bye, guys." So what they are doing is they are having, like, now we have 100,000 fighter, and this number can rise to 200 to 1,000. And the equipment they are getting from both ISIS, FSA, and USA, and from the black market, that's provide a lot of help them in the further attack on Syria. If the Syrian regime tried to attack, the only benefit that the Syrian regime has it's the air plan, and it can't do anything for the Kurdish, because the Kurds, they have their own. They build their own army. It's not like FSA. It's not like FSA. Syrian regime can't enter the Kurdish area like as it enter to other areas, because now the Kurds, they saw a freedom, so it won't be really easy to let it go.
Right. So Kurds are strong enough to fend off the Assad regime, the Assad government, and they don't even need U.S. help to do that. So which once again throws into question, well, yeah, but what if the Turkey goes all in? And Turkey is not, just to make it even more complicated, is a NATO ally of the United States. Now, we did see there was a brief moment where things really looked like they were going to go off the rails when Turkey shot down a Russian plane. People remember this. This was a few years ago. And people said, well, what happens if Turkey and Russia go to war? Because the U.S., the article, there's a triggering article in NATO that says any nation that is attacked and goes to war, they have to go to war in response. This is the Article 5, Article 6.
Yes.
In any case, that almost happened. Fortunately, it didn't. So what happens if Turkey invades to put down the Turks and the U.S. is there?
Yes, that's true. But let's not forget the Kurds in Turkey too.
Right. So it's just that's why I think the big question for all of us is, it looks like this thing's winding down. It looks like Assad is too weak to regain the territory he's lost in Rojava and other places. But the party that really seems to be still willing to throw a wrench in things is Turkey, who bombed. I mean, they bombed, I think, Iraqi Peshmerga forces the other day. They've threatened, at least. And the only thing I kind of see the U.S. saying to Turkey is, well, let them take Raqqa first before you do anything. So
that's what say. Let's depend on each country. The Syrian regime was losing until Russian boots came on the ground.
Right.
So it's not Syrian regime who's fighting, it's Russian. Do Russia have benefit to attack the Syrian Kurds? That's a question. And let's go back to Turkey. If Turkey now trying to escalate problems with the Syrian Kurds, trying to start problem with the Syrian Kurds, Turkish Kurds, the Kurds in Turkey, the Kurds in Turkey, do you think they will get silent? Like the PKK, which has like about 50,000 fighters, will get silent, like just looking at that. The other Kurds will get silent. So the agreement between Turkey and Iran was to make a joint forces to attack the Kurds in Kandil. But I don't think Iran will go inside that, because Iran is afraid to bring the fire to its house which is like it will flame the problem. So Iran will just stay away from it, and Turkey that will face it. And most of the world, I wouldn't say the EU or any, nobody's agree with Turkey's policy. Nobody agree with Turkish policy. Like even if we come back to the issue about the Russian plane, US said, no, Turkey, I'm not gonna go with this with you. And most of the countries in NATO said they had big problem. I would back Germany said no. That's why Turkey gets silent. That's why Turkey really couldn't do anything, because they were alone in this. They said, we will not go with this, with the stupid that you did it.
Erdogan's own people apparently had some issues with him. I mean, if you believe in the coup that had happened. But he's consolidated power now. He's gotten rid of everybody who opposed him in Turkey. So it's kind of up to him, right?
Like he's trying to be a dictator system in Turkey.
And that's, so we're basically at his whim then.
I wondered about the things that people are saying about an independent Kurdistan. What are the main things? That is it an economically viable state? It's landlocked with a lot of unfriendly people around. Those seem like kind of basic, valid issues, which I'm not sure whether you agree with any of those or you're dismissing them.
No, it's true. It's like if you look at Iraqi Kurdistan, they try to build like independent state. But if you look at the facts that Iraqi Kurdistan, they have a lot of oil, but how they sell this oil, they have a lot of sources, but what they gonna do with it? They are basically in a war with Iraq, and they will be war in Iran and Turkey. So they should, try to sell this to the international market. And that should be through one of those canals, like those countries. And they try to sell it through Turkey, which Turkey now is getting their money and put it in Turkish bank. And whenever they want to say, okay, take this kind of amount of money, and we will set the price, and we will say to whom you will sell it. So that's kind of government, the independent government we are facing. But if we came back to their independent, but I think independent, it depends on the people if they want to vote yes or no. That's depend on the Kurds. It's not up to Turkish or Iranian or other people, because that's the people's right, and that's UN and human rights. In each country, they provide this kind of basic rights. If the people say, I want to be independent, they have their own right to be independent.
How about the same issue with the independent region, autonomous state, whatever the name turns out to be, Rojava? Do they have the same issue?
Well, they have the same issue, but Rojava doesn't say we should be independent. They say the power, it shouldn't be in central. Like it shouldn't be like as it was before in Syria. It shouldn't be like the only one person like give orders in all over Syria. We are people. We should make our own decision too. Other areas, they should make their decision. So non-central government, that's what Rojava is looking for. This kind of government, they have communicating with each other, and they have those regions are inside one country. If you look at Germany and if you look at Switzerland, that's what they're trying to build, like this kind of examples for the government.
So there won't be any referendums, you think?
Well,
totally different.
That's depend on the people. If the people want to have a referendum, that's maybe in the future. But the project for the Syrian Kurds is like to build a country like Switzerland or Germany, non-central government. And I think Syrian regime is no more central government, because Russia, like some reports coming from Russia, like it's going to be like this. They give some reports to the media, and they want to see how it goes, and then they will they make the plan. So they were talking about federal Syria, and that's how it's gonna be in Syria.
Okay,
great.
All right. Well, thanks so much for giving us your time.
No problem.
I think
really appreciate it.
I'm pleasure to be with you here.
Do you want to tell us about any of your current work and where people can find you?
Well, actually, I'm on Twitter now most of the times, and I'm trying to work on the refugees here in Sweden. So that's what I'm trying to do. supporting the refugees cases in Sweden.
Excellent. And is there a website or something that you can direct people to, or?
There is. I have my own website, which is kovandirej.com, and my blog. So that's where the people can find my work. And I'm basically working with some Kurdish TV, which is in Kurdish. So I think nobody can do it.
Great.
We'll have to learn Kurdish first.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope to see you soon in Kurdistan, and you make your broadcast there with the people themselves.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Take care.
Good luck with your work.
Thank you. Pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And that's our show. I want to thank you for listening, and a special thank you to Kovan Direj. You can see his work at kovandirej.com. That's KOVANDIREJ.com. And follow Kovan on Twitter at KovanDire, EIRE. If you'd like to support the show, please visit us at aroundtheempire.com or our Patreon, patreon.com/aroundtheempire. For as little as $5 a month, you can support the show. We really appreciate it and require your donations to operate. Also follow us on Twitter at aroundtheempire. Questions, comments, want to yell at me? Dan at aroundtheempire.com. See you next time.
Take care, everyone.